to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
Well, welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. My name is Tom Dutta. I am the Quiet Warrior, and I'm excited to be live from my mobile studio at the Jericho Turf Fields. Now, this is a place, everyone, that's out in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I want to paint a picture. I do this so you can get the experience of the show virtually. I'm looking over to my right here, and I'm seeing the beautiful mountains surrounding the water, Vancouver. It's a spectacular sunny day. And then if I look to my left, I see this turf field. It's a soccer pitch. It's surrounded by incredible trees that are in full bloom. The Vancouver Armory has the Canada flag flying, and well, we're an international show, but today we're bringing you live the guest from the field here, and it's part of her story. So everybody, I'm going to let you meet Thalia Otamendi. Thalia, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, it's so awesome to have you on my show, and I'm going to tell everybody in a little bit how you and I connected. That's part of the story. But before I build you up, just tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, originally I'm from Mexico. I moved here to Vancouver when I was 10 with my family. I fell in love with Canada, fell in love with how girls and women were able to play sports here. So I got into sports, a big athletic identity, and currently I'm a master's student at UBC studying sports psychology, specifically concussion recovery.
Well, that's pretty amazing. Well, everybody, you heard it. I mean, first of all, there's another story there, Thalia. We'll have to have you back to talk about the courage as a young leader to come to another country and start life over again. And I think we were talking before we got on the mic here about your background. There's some Spanish, there's some Mexican, there's a bit of Greek in there. I mean, it's pretty amazing. So I'm just going to add a couple more things onto what you said. I mean, I am inspired by you and your background. You moved to Canada when you were 10 years old, and I think I saw you write somewhere that a pillar in your life was your involvement in sports, and something major transformed you in 2013. You sustained your fourth concussion playing soccer. Now everybody knows why we're sitting on the side of a turf field. And then from there, you went on a journey, and I know we'll get into that. And then something else happened where I call it the hero's journey, where you decided to answer this call to take an adventure, to do something completely different with your life. And here we are today, and there's many things that you're going to teach us. So why don't we start with that? I mean, talk a little bit about just the journey of coming to another country and starting life, and then start at that point and tell us your story.
Sure. Well, I mean, I had very limited English when I first moved, so it was a bit of a difficult transition at first, not knowing what the teacher was saying, not knowing how to make friends because I couldn't communicate with them. But I guess that's one of the good things about being young. You learn very quickly, and it's kind of a blur now, but I eventually made friends, eventually learned the language, and I really grew to love this country and call it home. I don't know.
Well, that's amazing. You're touching my heart on this. When my daughter, I just mentioned to you before we started that she's in university in New Brunswick, and when she went to school, her best friend was a young girl named Karen, and the family was from Mexico. The father was a lawyer, and the mother, I think, was a professional. They came here, and he couldn't practice his law because everything's different. He wasn't recognized. They came from a really good lifestyle, and it was the same story. And I always admired how people like you do come here, not speaking English, and adapt. So there you were, and you started off playing sports. Tell us about what you did. What kind of sports did you play?
I mean, soccer was always my big sport. It's ironic, I think, because Mexico obviously is a big soccer country, but it's not very common for girls to play it over there. So I was very excited to have the opportunity to start playing when I moved here. And it just kind of became a very important part of who I became. And eventually it wasn't just soccer, it was baseball, basketball. And it was just something I did after school every day. And it was a big part of my life.
Well, that's amazing. Well, first of all, take us back into the time you were playing soccer. How did it feel to be playing a sport like soccer? What kind of things did that do to you while you were on the field?
I mean, it's funny because I consider myself as having zero cardio. I hate running. I hate long distance biking. But for some reason, I could chase after a ball for hours if I had to. So it was just, I don't know. I just felt free. It was fun. I played with my friends. So it was something I really enjoyed.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. Well, we're going to honor you for courage, to go into a sport that, as you said, what maybe in some countries isn't accepted for girls. Many people listen to my show know I'm married to a woman who's Italian and, grew up in an environment that was the same. So you played soccer. What position did you play?
Center midfield.
That's awesome. I got to tell you that we're already connected at our souls because I played for the North Delta Trojans when I was a kid. But my life growing up wasn't the greatest. I talk about that in the show sometimes. I can't remember the position I played. The biggest highlight in my career was going down to Seattle, Washington on a billet and scoring on my own net.
Oh, no.
Okay. And I was crushed. And I mean, that was probably the end of my career. But it was like growing up on a gravel field in the rain. And I think I played soccer more because my dad told me to than a passion of my own. But I later found out in life that I had a passion for sports. I just probably was doing it for the wrong reasons. So thank you for sharing that. So in 2013, you had a major, or you had an event, or you said your life changed, it stopped. Just tell us through that story. When did that happen and what's happened since?
Sure. Well, it was my second concussion in 2013. I had one in March and then again in August. The one in March took me a week to recover. I didn't think much of it. I'm like, yeah, I've been through this before. So then the one in August happens and I kind of think the same way. I'm like, oh, another one, whatever. I'll just take a few days off work. Except it was very busy at work. So I was like, no, I can't do this to my team. So I decided to push through the symptoms, which in retrospect was not the greatest idea, as I now know studying concussions. And it was just a bit of a struggle that week, just really trying to concentrate, but not being able to. And eventually I just decided that I needed to start taking care of myself.
You were playing that position. Can you just take us into that moment? You don't have to go into great detail, but how did the concussion happen? What kind of contact or what happened?
So it was actually in preparation for the season. It was an exhibition game against the men's team in our club.
Yeah.
So they kicked the ball quite hard, or harder than I'm used to. And it was a shot, and I was actually playing defense at the time, and I tried to get in the way of it.
Yeah.
It just hit the side of my head, and
oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now's probably a good time for a teaching moment on the show for people who have never had a concussion or don't understand what that term is. What is a concussion? When that moment happened, a ball was hit by a guy super hard at the side of your head, and you see guys in soccer and women, deflecting balls with their heads or doing headers, they call it. What happens in that moment?
I mean, it's funny because the medical community can't really understand it yet, why that impact to me caused a concussion, but that same impact to someone else probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
But basically what happens is a neurophysiological event that happens in the brain where the axons get stretched or just damaged, and they start to lose connectivity.
Yeah.
That's why sometimes people lose consciousness or just aren't kind of really fully there. They're a bit out of it, disoriented, etc.
And then I want to bring into the conversation. Now, the reason why we're doing this show, I've said I'd mention why we connected, if that's okay with you, is
of course.
Brain Injury Awareness Month. I saw something about that. Now, I've got to check my facts. It might be June. It might have been a couple months ago. But either way, we're going to really make some awareness with your interview. And so in August last year, I was doing the Ride to Conquer Cancer, 225 kilometers on my bike. Never done it before. And I've never had a concussion. And the first night, stepping into a bathtub in a motel, I fell and broke my fall with my back and drove my head into the base of the tub. And I put a hole in the base of the tub, and I basically had a concussion. I think I blacked out, rolled out of the tub in pain, and laid up in my bed all night chewing Tylenol to try to get back into the second day of the ride. Probably stupidity, my naivety about concussions, and like your opinion on this, that you just think you're invincible and this will pass. You don't know what it is if you haven't taken the journey. Well, I chewed Tylenol and rode 100 kilometers on my bike, only to find out when I came home and my daughter saw the blood dried on top of my head, that there's something wrong. Went to my doctor, and the rest history. I've been struggling now for 10 months. It's changed my life. But this story is about you, so that's what I want to hear from you. Tell us about when you got the concussion, what you were dealing with in terms of symptoms and the actual path to recovery.
Well, it's a 2-year-long journey, so it's hard to condense. But basically, at the beginning, it was me just trying to push through the symptoms, much like you. It's just like downplaying it. It's like, it's just a concussion, whatever, I'll feel better, especially because I've had them before and I hadn't had any long-term ramifications from them. But eventually trying to push through the symptoms just made me feel so much worse, to the point where I couldn't have a conversation with someone and feel okay. So that's when I started to seek help from doctors or physiotherapists and athletic therapists. I started to see many, many practitioners who told me that all I could do was just really rest, which was kind of the go-to treatment, quote unquote, back in 2013. Just rest in the dark room until you feel better.
I know that one.
Yeah, which there is some merit to it, especially in the first few days after the concussion. You need to give your brain a chance to heal.
Yeah.
However, after the first few days of the injury, you really shouldn't be resting for prolonged periods, and there's no real benefit to it. Although it is hard to kind of get out of that dark room, the best thing you can do is just very gradually return to the activity that you were used to before. But anyway, I tried to do that, but at that point, I think I had scared myself a lot. Like, the symptoms that I felt were really traumatizing, because I really thought my brain was severely damaged, and I didn't want to do anything that would make it worse. So I started to just be very careful of what I would do. And I don't know, I just became scared of going out, having conversations, like exercising, exerting myself mentally or physically. In retrospect, I developed an anxiety to return to activity, which eventually I addressed with a psychiatrist maybe a year and a half into the injury. I actually ended up having to go on antidepressants to help me kind of tackle that barrier to get back to activity.
Well, first of all, catch your breath for a minute there. You're doing awesome, and I want to honor you for the courage to tell a story. I mean, to some people, vulnerability, especially they say leaders who can show vulnerability, it's a trait of a strong leader. Not everybody wants to do that. I spent a decade in mental health too, volunteering at a board level in understanding mental health. And there's a certain stigma around mental health. What I'm feeling personally after going through this journey and still on it is that there's also a stigma about having a brain injury. I mean, if you're at work or you know somebody and you're talking about yourself and you say, oh, by the way, I have a brain injury, there's limiting beliefs other people have on that. The thing you said that was interesting about the actual concussion and what it is, when I went to the Fraser Health Concussion Clinic, and just for those listening, the concussion clinics are out there. They're hard to get into. You have to have pretty significant reason your doctor refers you. The one thing that stood out for me, Thalia, is they said if you take a snow globe, you know what a snow globe is, and you shake it, all those little particles, that's basically your brain's chemicals. They dislodge and they land wherever they want. And it's that plus a whole bunch of other complicated scientific things that make it a very complicated journey. They also told me, and I'm not sure if you have the same information because you've been studying, that 85% of people who have concussions recover fully in about a year. 15% will go on through life having, permanent issues that they'll deal with. And the last thing I want to say before I turn it back to you is, I didn't know this, but once you've had your first concussion, it's easier to get the next one. When I was at the concussion clinic, this guy was sitting in the room, and it's interesting you said about going in dark rooms because they told us to do brain rest. I said, "What?" We said, "What's that?" Well, when we walked into the concussion clinic, it was a lecture hall, and it was like being at the university. They had the lights dimmed, and right from that moment, we realized they were treating us as if we had something wrong with our brains. And they said, go in a dark room and shut everything off and meditate or whatever you have to deal with that. This fellow put up his hand and he said, I've had 8 concussions. And he said one of them triggered by riding on a bus, a tour bus, when I was out on vacation and the bus was shaking. So that kind of freaked me out. And they said, look, if you've had a concussion, we're not freaking scaring you here. But if you bump your head in the kitchen when you're cooking, chances are you're not going to get a concussion. But if you've had one and you bump your head, there's a chance that you might reconcuss. So I know you're not a doctor, but I want to now shift gears to, out of all of that, the multiple concussions and the journey you're on now, you all of a sudden had this moment where I think you were working at Sleep Country Canada, had 2 promotions. I mean, totally amazing. And then all of a sudden it stopped and you decided to do something. What did you do?
I mean, that was still, I was trying to get back to work maybe 2 years after the injury. And it was going okay. But I really, through my journey, I realized that there was a lack of knowledge and a lack of help that people with concussions receive when they're going, especially when it lasts, like months and years. And it was very isolating. I didn't know who to approach for help. So anyway, I decided to go back to school and start my master's in sports psychology, so the psychological aspects of concussion recovery.
Well, that's pretty cool. Congratulations. I mean,
Thank you.
I think I read the exact words where I quit my job. I mean, everybody who at a young age says I got a promotion and 2 promotions, I'm going to quit my job and put it all at risk. I always like to say that what sets your soul on fire is something that drives you. It's a passion. And so through an unfortunate event, you found this a burning desire, I will say, and this passion to do something, to learn. So you're using what you're doing in university, your master's, to do some interesting things. Can you tell us about that? I wrote a few notes down here, but let's hear from you. What exactly are you studying? What have you done with that? And what do you want to teach us?
Right. Well, I mean, I forgot to mention, I also, before I started my master's, I started a support group for female athletes who had complicated concussion recoveries. So that's why I decided to kind of formalize that. I said this needs to be out there in research. So what I'm doing for my thesis is qualitative research. So it's just collecting people's stories and tying those to existing research theories. So I interviewed 12 non-elite athletes. So that's your average, Sunday soccer player who considers themselves an athlete, but they don't have the access to, the professional trainers or the team doctors. So when they receive a concussion, they don't have added resources to manage the injury. So, I interviewed 12 of those individuals about their journey, about what was difficult for them, what helped them. And just the goal of the study is to get at the psychosocial aspects of recovery. So how people perceive their injury really sets up how they act towards it. So at first, if they think it's nothing, they don't think it's serious, they're going to ignore it. But then as symptoms prolong, they start to think it's more serious. So they start to feel very anxious towards it, very emotional towards it. And how those kind of cycles, like either adaptive or maladaptive cycles, can actually influence how people recover.
Well, that's fascinating. The part about psychology to me is interesting because one of the things my doctor said that I should have a psychologist on my care team. And you know what? Even though all the work I did in mental health, I was averse to it. Part of it was just getting past my fear of people are going to think there's something wrong with me. Last time I went and had my session, she identified that. She said, you're in a cycle of depression. Now, I don't like labeling things, but depressive thoughts are just like ups and downs. And she said, you're articulating well, but you're going through these thoughts that are positive, then negative, positive. I think my biggest fear is, and it still is one now as I'm working through this, is really about like, when can I get back to normal? What is the real normal? So I want to just ask you, just about where you're at now, 2 years, and how do you see the future? Like when do you see milestones for yourself? What triggers you to feel, I'm getting better and I'm making it to the end?
I mean, I definitely consider myself back to normal. It's a new normal.
What's that mean?
So functionally, I feel fine. Like I can do what I used to do, which is great. Like awesome. I'm really happy because I really question whether or not I would be able to return to full function. So functionally, I feel great. I do think the experience changed me. It mellowed me a bit. I used to be kind of a work hard, play hard kind of person. Not getting a lot of sleep, just always on the go. So, and I'm happy actually. It just like made me calm down a little bit that way. Just like appreciate the little things in life, take things a bit slower. I'm a more also anxious person. I used to, like, if I had pain in my foot before, I used to not think anything of it. Now I like come up with 10 theories of what's wrong with my foot. But so in like little things like that, I do see a bit of a difference.
I see.
But again, I'm just so happy and thrilled that I'm able to, do my masters and do everything that I always wanted to do, except for go back to play soccer, of course.
So that, I guess, before we get into the masters, I want to talk about something called CTE with you, because you said something to me before we put the mic on that was fascinating about psychosocial, which I didn't really understand. But can you pinpoint, I know this is a big question, but even one or two things you learned that were best practices along the 2 years to get better? What are the things that you did that really helped the most? You might have already told us. I mean, I heard psychology and I heard rest, but anything stand out?
I mean, I think, like you said, there is that stigma of mental health. It's very common, especially, if you go through a long concussion recovery and that interrupts your life, that you are going to have some mental health issues, because first of all, you don't know if you're going to return back to yourself. You don't know if you're going to return to your career. You probably aren't spending a lot of time with loved ones or your friends. A lot of people probably don't understand you. So you are very vulnerable to experiencing mental health. So I think awareness that is a very strong possibility, especially for prolonged concussion recoveries, is very important, because if you do develop mental health problems, they can actually hinder you from recovering. So they can create barriers to you getting better. So just being aware that that's a possibility, and if you develop them, that you should address them in order to actually get better. And other than that, just taking care of your body holistically, doing what makes you happy, what makes you feel good, because that just goes a long way into, if you feel good holistically, your body responds to that.
Well, it's such a teaching moment for the listeners, what you just said. I mean, everybody just listen to this, because a lot of the listeners of my show are average people, but there's many people who are like top executives. They have high pressure, high stress jobs. And we always talk about this. We sometimes have people on who haven't had concussions, but they have the symptoms of concussions. They have anxiety, they have depression, they have headaches and emotional overload. So there's a whole piece to this. And I agree with you, the self-care part. I'm really excited and proud, because when I fell, I weighed 190 pounds. I told you offline that I lost 30 pounds. I decided to take my life seriously. And my blood pressure is like a 20-year-old. All these things I did. I remember saying to myself, Thalia, I said, I want to rule out every possibility so the doctor doesn't say you're not getting better because you're overweight. You're not getting better because, you drink too much wine, which I love, because, I love wine. So I eliminated all these things, and I really were. And I remember saying to myself, because that's how I think, I'm going to turn this into a positive experience. I'm going to set a goal. So I remember setting a goal back then in November. I fell in August, that I'm going to come through this and be at the best health of my life. And you're young, you're in university. I have my life ahead of me like you do. But I never took things like sleep seriously before. Now I use a Fitbit watch and track my sleep. Actually, I'm looking at my sleep patterns and telling people around me, hey, I got 5.6 hours last night. I got 7 last night. People looking at me like you're kind of a freak. But I feel great. But it's from the neck up that you don't sometimes know. And I think one of the things you said that people should be aware of is that we live sometimes in desperation, worrying about the next fall, or worrying about... I had a friend who invited me to go do the hike. And I remember saying, I don't think I want to. And in my mind, I'm thinking about, what if I slip and fall again? My biggest conclusion was I should wear a helmet in the bathtub from now on. But maybe I'll create a company that makes helmets for people who have had concussions. So I want to just get into CTE. I know this is a very broad topic. For people who don't know what it is, how I heard about it was actually through a movie with Will Smith that was all about this issue that came up in the NFL, the National Football League, and in football in general, where players were dying, and they discovered a disease that manifests itself in the brain. This is what I've learned. It manifests similar to Alzheimer's, but you can't diagnose it till the person's dead. You have to bring the brain and do an autopsy. Well, they named it CTE, and it comes from what I understand repetitive concussions consistently. So talk about, because you're doing some cool things around research. You mentioned the Canadian media and CTE. Talk about those things and then the psychosocial aspect of all this.
Well, I mean, I have to preface this by saying my study hasn't been peer reviewed yet, so I can't claim that what I wrote has been verified. However, there are just so many competing opinions out there in research about what CTE really is and how it can affect people. It's certainly associated with multiple hits to the head, which are definitely an issue. I mean, if you think about it, if you sprain your ankle 20 times, it's probably going to have permanent damage.
Absolutely.
If you have 20 concussions, your brain is probably going to have permanent damage. However, I think the way it's being communicated right now, it's definitely missing the psychosocial component to it, which is not just about concussions. I mean, concussions are themselves very psychologically traumatic. Like they're very emotional. It's the same thing, we were just talking about. You get emotional, you don't know if you're going to heal, etc. And for these players, they don't know if they're going to be able to play sport again. So there's the aspect of concussions, but also the fact that these athletes are probably in chronic pain from a whole career of, making a living of hitting other people and getting hit by other people.
Yeah.
As well as they're retired from their livelihoods. They probably don't know what to do with themselves. So there's a lot of issues that retired contact athletes face with that can play into their mental health, which can then make their concussion symptoms worse, or if they have CTE, those symptoms can worsen as well. So I think I completely 100% believe that we need to raise awareness for concussions and the possibility of CTE. But I do think we also need to look at other issues that these athletes suffer that may actually be worsening their conditions.
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to talk about that for a minute. I think I mentioned to you that I've had a couple other interviews around CT. Notably, one was a university professor, a woman who grew up with an NFL father who eventually passed. But in the interview, and you'll listen to it, I'm sure, that it was Lori Leachman, actually, and her father, he was hit by a player running down the sideline in an NFL game, and that's what concussed him. But over time, she saw him degenerate, and the family didn't want to, the wife particularly didn't want to do the autopsy because they didn't want society to know that he became an alcoholic. So a lot of people in mental health, I'm aware, use alcohol and things to numb that part of the brain, right, to create the chemicals to feel good. And I got to say that through my concussion early, I mean, I started drinking a lot more than I probably should have. And it was only when I got a care team around me that they said, you've got to be careful. And so I agree with you. The other thing I want to get your opinion on this is a lot of, and you've been an athlete, I mean, I'm amazed by that there's a lot of people who build their life around sports and the rush of sports, being on the field and the fans and everything. And then all of a sudden it's gone. So the psychological impact, like they didn't build their life beyond the sport. And so they slip into, their soul, there's a hole in it.
Of course.
So just talk about that, the impact of that.
Yeah, I mean, that in itself is a big topic in research of post-retirement life and how big of an issue that is for especially professional athletes. Like you said, they've only done sport and they haven't done anything else in life. So, and that's one of the things that I think can play into, the whole manifestation of CTE symptoms. There's a big aspect outside of the head impact that can actually be influencing how these people feel. And like you said, like alcohol or pain medication, all these things can play into their whole situation after sport.
Yeah, absolutely. This might be a tough question. I'm going to put you on the spot here. We're not live, so I love to do this. Knowing what you know about concussions and what happened with the soccer injury, if you knew the risks of concussion, what they were, what would change in terms of you playing that sport?
I mean, research is very nebulous right now about how many concussions it takes for you to actually, experience long-term outcomes. I don't think it would have stopped me from playing. I think it would definitely have influenced how I dealt with my concussions. So just taking them more seriously at the beginning, making sure I took care of my brain, my body, and only returning when I knew I was ready to go. I mean, right now, I'm not going to go and play soccer again because I don't want to get a fifth concussion. I think if there is a threshold of like when too many is too many, I'm probably hitting it. But yeah, I think I wouldn't have stopped playing it because I loved it. But right now I've stopped because I don't want more.
Well, thank you so much for answering that. Everybody, if you could see Thalia, I mean, you've got the biggest smile always. I mean, there's such joy that comes out of you. I think that's part of your personality. But I think it's the same, I would say, as driving the car. We know that you could hit somebody with the front of your car, your airbag could go out, you could get a concussion, or you could drive a car and get injured. But we learn to mitigate that by being better drivers, by education, by all that stuff, right? Greater awareness. I think it's the same with anything. I mean, I was talking to some of the people that were experiencing the fallout from CTE with their fathers in the NFL. And, they were saying that, we don't want to take away the sport. We just want people to know, the players to know if there's a risk of concussion, you have to know the risk, then you have a choice. And if you play, as you said so well, you try to mitigate that.
Mm-hmm.
You obviously can't mitigate a pretty hard hit, but about self-care, and if you're willing to take the risk, right, you do things the best you can. So,
yeah, exactly. And I think it just comes down to like knowing what the risk is, and then also everyone else being like, okay, this person has a concussion, let's deal with it appropriately so it kind of mitigates potential risk of like downstream effects.
Absolutely. One of the questions I had on my notepad, Patty, was it said in your notes you completed a project that explored how Canadian newsprint media portray concussions and their connection to CT. Just in a minute or so, can you just tell us what that is?
Sure. I mean, I think in that kind of plays into the psychosocial, like specifically the social and the societal understandings of CTE. I do think, and there's anecdotal evidence of doctors saying, these young kids get a concussion and they come to me now and they ask if they have CTE. So I think there is also that risk of growing the awareness too much without enough information to support it. That creates a bit of a panic of people now that get concussions and they don't recover in a couple months, and they've heard about CTE, them thinking that they have CTE.
Yeah.
So, I mean, CTE has been found in athletes that have, sustained a lot of impacts to the head and probably did not deal with them properly. So I think my study, and again, it's not peer reviewed, so I can't claim it's scientific yet. I will try to publish it. But my study revealed that media placed a little bit into that, connecting even a few concussions to CTE, which is definitely drawing a line that hasn't been connected by research yet. So just being a bit cognizant of that, of how what we know about CTE is communicated, as to not spread, kind of false information about it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I agree. And first of all, wow, everybody, here's somebody who's probably going to publish a peer-reviewed study. I mean, I'm honored to be sitting here and be the first, of many to hear that. And I wish you luck with that. That's amazing to me. But it is true. I mean, when you look deep into the CTE issue, and by the way, I don't know what the acronym stands for. I do, but I just don't remember. So I'm assuming people can Google it.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
All right, there you go. You heard it from Thalia. She's better than I am on that one. But what I learned about it is you can't diagnose it until after death. So if I'm a practitioner, I'm going to say to any young person, hey, look, I can't tell you with certainty you have CTE because it's after death we exhume your brain. But I've also heard that science is advancing, that they may find a breakthrough to be able to diagnose it before death, which to me is great. I also agree with you. There's one of the pet peeves I have about mental health is they have these calculators on the internet where young people or old people, anybody, can go on and answer 10 questions and it gives you a label. You have depression, you have this. And I have a friend of mine who's close to me who's self-diagnosed on the internet that they had multiple sclerosis and went into a state of panic. So everybody, you heard it from Thalia, great wisdom. You know, work with your practitioners, do your research, but be informed before, right?
Yeah, and what you said is so true. If a doctor maybe suspects that you have some long-term ramifications from concussions, including CTE, but you also have depression, like depression is treatable. So it's like knowing that a lot of the symptoms that you may have are actually treatable and that you should address those in order to kind of make, even if you do have CTE or long-term issues, to make your situation better. So really raising awareness and addressing that psychological component, which will make your situation better.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Hey, as we move to wrap up in a few minutes, and this has been awesome. We've gone overtime here with you because we're learning so much. I want to ask you about the word passion. I mean, they say that most people, when they discover, and there's a YouTube video on this, which is kind of cool, that most people, when they learn their passions, it's when they look back in their first 10 years of life, there's clues, but something they were doing that lights them up, their soul's on fire, they feel no pain, time flies by. And so most people don't follow their passions because, well, maybe, you know, it doesn't pay the bills. So what is your passion? What are you passionate about in life?
Two things. Sports.
Great.
I watch instead of play now. And just growing the knowledge of concussion.
That's awesome.
Rehab. Yeah.
So if I met you on the pitch here like we are, there's a few players out kicking the balls around, everybody, you can hear them. They're probably wondering what we're doing with these microphones. And if you were to meet me on the street after I got to know you a bit and I said, what's your purpose on this planet? I know that's a big question, but what might you say?
Using my experience to highlight how important mental health is in concussion recovery.
Wow. Everybody, I'm going to listen to this back again just because she said that. That is so awesome. Coming from somebody who's so young and so knowledgeable and having that wisdom, Thalia, I mean, it puts you miles ahead. And they say that sometimes God brings us into a situation in life. The universe puts us there, puts us through it to be able to do something with it to help others. And you're doing it. So I want to honor you with 4 words. These are leadership words. I write them down as you're speaking, and you're seeing me do that, actually. They're not scripted. The first one is wisdom. From what you've gone through and just listening to you, have such wisdom. Number 2 is compassion. There's a way about you, a big smile on your face, but you have this compassion, and I think as somebody who's going to help people, that's awesome. Courage. Not only courage to come to this country and start life over again, but to go through your experience and to do things that many people maybe would have given up on. And then finally, I use the word trailblazer. You know this, right? I see your smile there, but you're blazing a trail by doing something with this. And I hope they publish your paper, and I hope we're going to be reading about your great work. I know you're making a dent in the universe. I'm proud of your story. I'm proud of you and what you're doing. And just continue that. So anything you want to say as we wrap up here? Last words?
I guess if you get a concussion, address it early. But also especially if it's one of your first concussions, don't let it stop you from living your life, because that's not going to be a fulfilling life, and it just will make for you to, be anxious or depressed or whatever. So treat it, but then get back to life as you know it.
And call Thalia, Dr. Thalia.
Definitely not doctor, but passionate about this.
Well, you know what, you just inspired me, because that's exactly what I needed to hear today. So everybody, subscribe to this show on iTunes, give it a rating so we can honor Thalia's interview. We're going to put it out there very soon. And find that true passion like she did. Live your life with purpose and create that life that you deserve and desire. Thank you, Thalia, for being here.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to The Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca